Il tema della mobilità sanitaria è un argomento che sta molto a cuore alle direzioni generali delle aziende sanitarie, alle regioni italiane, per vari ordini di considerazioni. La prima è che ognuno di noi auspicherebbe di essere trattato sotto casa. Tutti noi vorremmo in definitiva avere un ospedale o una struttura sanitaria a chilometri zero, come diceva Veronesi. Però questo ovviamente non è possibile e quindi si rende sempre più necessario avere degli strumenti, diciamo noi, statistici ed economici, che consentono di valutare in maniera olistica il flusso di pazienti che da una determinata area vasta si riversano verso altre aree vaste per il loro trattamento. Io ebbi la fortuna di conoscere il professor Gandy nel 1975, quando da giovane ricercatore in una rivista che capitò casualmente, sempre per mancanza di risorse, nella biblioteca dell'Università degli Studi di Urbino, una rivista che era chiamata Health Service Journal, dove c'era questo modellino, no? Questo modellino che destò subito un mio particolare interesse per due ordini di considerazioni. Ero stato da poco nominato membro del consiglio di amministrazione di un ospedale e quindi il flusso dei pazienti che saltava la struttura ospedaliera di Urbino verso altri territori mi aveva particolarmente interessato. Trovammo una grande sensibilità da parte di un direttore amministrativo dell'azienda ospedaliera di Pesaro, che fu il primo ad istituire all'epoca il primo centro elaborazione dati, perché il modello di Gandy, come vedrete, presuppone la conoscenza di una matrice origine-destinazione. L'origine è praticamente da dove partono i pazienti, la destinazione da dove questi pazienti vengono trattati. Per cui applicammo il modello di Gandy nel contesto territoriale della provincia di Pesaro Urbino, perché i sistemi informativi ci furono aperti grazie alla sensibilità di un bravissimo direttore amministrativo dell'ospedale Santa Croce di Pesaro. Quindi il modello di Gandy fu applicato nel 1975 con i dati di questo centro di elaborazione dati, e da quel periodo ovviamente entrai in contatto con l'amico e il collega che proviene dalla John Moores University di Liverpool, che aveva trattato già questo particolare argomento, che ha trovato poi uno sbocco in ulteriori nostri studi sui cosiddetti gravity model, cioè nei modelli gravitazionali che tentano di spiegare le ragioni dei movimenti dei pazienti da una determinata area verso un'altra. Per cui è un onore per me, come mio e di Renzi, che si è sobbarcato tutto il peso, l'onere anche finanziario di questo seminario, avere in mezzo a noi uno dei maggiori esperti dell'analisi dei flussi ospedalieri. Nel contempo devo ringraziare anche i ragazzi del corso di laurea in Ingegneria Gestionale che, dietro mio impulso, si sono documentati sulla scheda di dimissione ospedaliera del 2017 appena pubblicati dall'Ufficio Centrale della Programmazione Sanitaria per applicare il modello di Gandy in varie specialità. Quello della riabilitazione, l'ho visto già ieri sera, è venuto perfetto. Ovviamente se ce ne sono altri tanto di meglio, di modo che potete vedere come sono importanti semplici rapporti statistici di composizione per spiegare un fenomeno complesso come questo della mobilità. Per cui è un mio onore dare subito la parola al professor Gandy, ringraziandolo per la sua disponibilità e anche per la sua umiltà di aver accettato questo invito con un minimo di rimborso spese e nient'altro. Bene, buon ascolto a tutti. A te la parola.
Grazie.
Lui cercherà di parlare in italiano, si è sforzato anche questo, però se c'è qualcosa di inglese interverremo.
Buon pomeriggio a tutti. Vorrei dire che è un grande onore poter fare questa presentazione oggi. Vorrei ringraziare il professor Pietro Renzi e l'Università di San Marino per avermi invitato. Ma vorrei anche ringraziare il mio buon amico, il professor Alberto Franci, che ha sostenuto l'uso della mia metodologia fin dai primi anni. Infatti è stato Alberto che ha dato alla mia metodologia il nomogramma di Gandy. Negli ultimi anni abbiamo collaborato a molte ricerche correlate a questa metodologia. Grazie mille. Mi dispiace di non parlare molto bene l'italiano, ma spero di poter leggerlo e pronunciarlo correttamente. Il collega di Pietro Francesco ha gentilmente tradotto la mia presentazione in italiano e ve leggerò quindi in italiano. Spero che non riderete della mia pronuncia. Pietro e Alberto mi correggeranno se dovessi sbagliare le diapositive, però sono in inglese. Parlerò prima di ciò che è il nomogramma e perché è stato creato. Farò esempi dell'applicazione del nomogramma per i servizi sanitari in Italia e nel Regno Unito. Parlerò in seguito della versione invertita del nomogramma, ancora una volta seguita da alcuni esempi per i servizi sanitari. Ritengo che il nomogramma possa essere applicato in altri settori e farò alcuni esempi. Infine, evidenziare i suoi limiti e i suoi vantaggi per poi presentare alcune ricerche in corso. Dalla mappa vedrete che il Leicestershire è nel mezzo dell'Inghilterra. Okay. I finanziamenti per la salute si passavano sul bacino di utenza dell'autorità sanitaria. Il risultato netto dei flussi di pazienza dentro e fuori dall'area. Il Leicestershire aveva bassi livelli di finanziamento perché molti pazienti andavano altrove. Mi è stato chiesto di investigare la situazione per vedere se i flussi dei pazienti potevano essere invertiti e i finanziamenti aumentati. Quando ho guardato in dettaglio i flussi dei pazienti, ci sono stati risultati sorprendenti. Il Leicestershire è a forma di cuore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ok. L'esta è al centro, poi c'è un cerchio di città attorno alla periferia. Ashby, Loughborough, Melton Mowbray, Oakham, Market Harborough, Lutterworth and Hinckley. La maggior parte dei pazienti di questa città venivano trattati in altre autorità sanitarie, perché gli ospedali erano più vicini e viaggiare era più facile. Ma il numero di pazienti ogni 1000 abitanti per ciascuna di queste città era molto più alto di quello di Leicester. Il modo in cui la formula di finanziamento ha funzionato dimostrava che il finanziamento del Leicestershire era ancora più basso di quanto sarebbe altrimenti stato. Questo mi ha fatto capire che la dinamica dei flussi dei pazienti erano molto importanti, ma i bacini di utenza non mostrano la dinamica dei flussi dei pazienti, ma mostrano solo la situazione finale. Pertanto ho deciso di provare a creare una formula o un indice che misurasse la dinamica, ma non potevo creare una formula o un indice, per cui ho avuto l'idea di un approccio diagrammatico. Consideriamo due autorità sanitarie con esattamente lo stesso bacino di popolazione, diciamo 500.000, ma una di queste è un'isola, 500.000, nessuno esce e nessuno entra, è autosufficienza. Questa potrebbe essere, ad esempio, l'isola di White, Regno Unito. L'altra autorità sanitaria con una popolazione di 500.000 in una grande città come Londra, ma con l'equivalente di 250.000 persone che escono è l'equivalente di 250.000 che entrano. Questa situazione rappresentano due scenari molto diversi. L'isola è stabile e la domanda cambierà gradualmente. La situazione di Londra potrebbe essere volatile. La chiusura di un ospedale altrove potrebbe avere come conseguenza un aumento della domanda locale in modo significativo e improvviso. L'apertura di un ospedale altrove potrebbe essere più conveniente per i pazienti che entrano nella zona, in modo da ridurre la domanda in modo significativo e improvviso. È molto importante che le autorità sanitarie siano consapevoli della dinamica di flusso dei pazienti ai fini della pianificazione e della gestione.
Allora, il modello si basa su semplici rapporti statistici di composizione, cioè dopo il capitolo della matrice dei dati, delle rappresentazioni grafiche, ovviamente noi dobbiamo sintetizzare i dati contenuti in una tabella, in particolare in una tabella a doppia entrata. Allora, la sintesi avviene normalmente attraverso due strumenti. Il primo è quello dei rapporti statistici, il secondo è quello dei valori medi. Allora, i rapporti statistici vengono normalmente trascritti in qualsiasi testo di statistica descrittiva sotto varie classificazioni. I più importanti, anche perché sono quelli più utilizzati e anche più esplicativi, sono squisitamente chiamati rapporti statistici di composizione, di cui i ragazzi magari il primo impatto l'hanno avuto nel calcolo della frequenza relativa, no? Nella percentuale. Ma i rapporti statistici di composizione sono sempre un rapporto fra una parte e il tutto. In questo caso la parte sono rappresentati dai cittadini residenti in una determinata zona che hanno soddisfatto la propria domanda di salute nella propria zona di residenza. Ovviamente il modello si basa su due rapporti statistici di composizione. Il primo rapporto statistico è RR, cioè cittadini residenti che hanno soddisfatto la domanda di salute nella zona di residenza, e a numeratore. A denominatore abbiamo la quantità di domanda ospedaliera soddisfatta nel territorio oggetto di studio ed mi è rappresentato da RR più I, quello che normalmente nel linguaggio delle direzioni generali viene chiamato il volume d'affari di un ospedale. Poi l'altro rapporto statistico è sempre RR al numeratore fratto RR più I, dove E rappresentano i casi di ricovero esportati da quella regione o da quella area vasta oggetto di studio. I due rapporti statistici possono essere ben visualizzati in un sistema di coordinate cartesiane e ortogonali, ove sull'asse delle ascisse riportiamo RR fratto RR più I moltiplicato 100 e sull'asse delle ordinate RR fratto RR più E moltiplicato 100. Il complemento a 100, cioè la frazione complementare di questa frazione propria, viene chiamata, diciamo, nel linguaggio del modello di Gandy e anche nel linguaggio dell'ufficio centrale della programmazione sanitaria, quello che viene chiamato il tasso di attrazione e il tasso di fuga. Ovviamente nell'animo dei direttori generali o dei responsabili di distretto è importante esaminare quelli che sono i tassi di fuga e i tassi di attrazione, per poter poi effettuare un bilancio se l'azienda sanitaria è in una situazione creditoria o debitoria. Questo appunto è in estrema sintesi ciò che viene indicato nel nomogramma di Gandy. Perché lo chiamiamo nomogramma e non diagramma di Gandy? Il vantaggio è questo, che mentre un sistema di coordinate cartesiane permette di individuare, dato una coppia di numeri reali, un punto, e ad ogni punto corrisponde una coppia di numeri reali, il modello di Gandy rispecchia il sistema di coordinate cartesiane, ma è anche in grado di identificare quello che viene chiamato il bacino di utenza di una struttura, cioè la popolazione che teoricamente dovrebbe gravitare su quella struttura, per cui un punto nel piano identifica gli esportati, gli importati, ma anche quella che viene chiamata dal professore la catchment area, cioè il bacino di utenza.
Faccio una domanda, ho parlato adesso col professor Gandy. Allora, ovviamente il professor Gandy può continuare in italiano, può continuare in inglese. Ditemi voi cosa preferite, perché chiaramente sta facendo lo sforzo enorme per l'italiano e non c'è problema che sul livello di inglese piano. They said you can continue in English slow.
Slow.
If you prefer, they prefer. Okay? Okay?
Because they have to learn English.
Because they know English, so...
No, I'm rubbish at Italian.
No, it's not. That's really...
Is that okay?
It's okay.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Self-sufficiency is represented by the point 100, 100. All patients treated in an area were local patients, and all local patients were treated in the area. No one comes in for treatment, and no one goes out for treatment. Choosing to use percentages eliminated the issue of districts having different population sizes. It allows proportional comparisons between districts. This diagram was the first diagram and shows the situation for all health districts in Trent region. It's a region named after the river in the middle, the River Trent, which stretches from Sheffield in the north to Leicestershire in the south. The same symbol was used for districts within the same health authority. So, So, 1, 2, 3. Those are 3 districts, all in the same health authority. It showed wide-ranging patterns, some very much high, and a lot of mobility down there. With some districts very interdependent, these down here. But it is seen that the more urban districts, which are in Yorkshire, places like Rotherham, Doncaster and Sheffield, were the most self-sufficient. Such variations demonstrate the value of the nomogramma, and so I wrote a paper for a journal. Alberto actually has the original diagram. I gave it to him.
Ce l'ho nel mio studio. Ce l'ho.
Okay. Okay. The paper was called A Graphical Representation of the Interrelationship Between Districts, and it was in the Hospital and Health Services Review. Alberto and Giuseppe
Belbusti
wrote the paper L'utilizzo del nomogramma di Gandy per valutazione della mobilità ospedaliera in the Ospedali d'Italia, same year, and they named it after me, much to my surprise and delight. Widely used subsequently in Italy by public health. Alberto sent me a copy of his paper, but as it was written in Italian, and I did not speak Italian. I did not understand it at all. I now show two health examples of the nomogramma for Italy. Alberto's ordinary admissions in 2003 shows much more self-sufficiency than the original Trent analysis. The axes are truncated at 75%. What you see is a marker, number 12, is a net exporter of patients, but it is mainly self-sufficient, close to 90-90. Sicily and Sardinia are the two regions which are the most self-sufficient. Well, of course, they are islands. The big importing regions were Lombardy, 3, Bolzano, 4, and Veneto, 6. A very important point to make is that the patient flows and the analyses will always be very different for elective admissions and emergency admissions. For elective admissions, you can travel far for the best and the most appropriate treatment. For emergency admissions, you need to get to the nearest main hospital as quickly as possible.
Nell'emergenza ovviamente ci vuole quasi l'ospedale sotto casa. Per malattie complesse ovviamente c'è l'immigrazione in centri specialistici.
Okay. Gabriele Messina's nomogramma shows trends in Italian regions over the period, 1998 to 2003, and it shows the trends, the direction, by using arrows. So the great majority of regions have arrows pointing away from 100, from 100, which means that there is less self-sufficiency with increasing patient mobility. Interestingly, Sicily and Sardinia became more self-sufficient. Trends over time can also be shown by placing nomogrammas side by side or by using different symbols and colours to represent different time periods on the same nomogramma. I'm now going to talk about the self-sufficiency of cancer centre catchment areas in England. And I'm going to ask Pietro to explain a bit in a moment. Natural catchment areas are established for each of the 50 cancer centres to support planning and marketing and to enable improvements in access, quality and productivity. Now, I'm going to ask Pietro just to explain how they're created, because the terminology that is used in England is a bit different to in Italy.
Sì, okay. Dunque, quindi la metodologia, the microphone. La metodologia, il professor Gandy mi ha chiesto di spiegare la metodologia perché c'è una particolarità legata a come vengono gestiti, come sono state gestite le popolazioni in questa ricerca in Inghilterra. Sì, esatto, per la radioterapia, per i centri oncologici. Praticamente l'Inghilterra ha una divisione amministrativa che è legata al censimento e ha dei distretti di censimento. Quindi la ricerca ha potuto stabilire i bacini di utenza andando ad analizzare ogni bacino ogni distretto di censimento. I distretti di censimento sono unità amministrative molto ridotte, con un numero di popolazione molto piccola, quindi sono equiparabili probabilmente ai nostri comuni come dimensione, come quantità di popolazione. Per associare un distretto a un centro oncologico sono stati analizzati per ogni distretto di censimento quali erano i casi di pazienti oncologici e dove questi venivano trattati. Supponiamo che per un'area, in un'area venissero identificati un numero n di distretti di censimento, per ogni distretto venivano analizzati i pazienti e supponiamo che nell'area venivano identificati 3 centri di trattamento, 3 centri oncologici. A questo punto per ogni distretto veniva calcolato il numero di pazienti associabili ai vari centri oncologici. Quindi supponiamo di prendere un distretto qualsiasi e avere un numero di pazienti trattati pari a, facciamo l'esempio che abbiamo fatto ieri, pari a 13 pazienti per un distretto preso come esempio, di cui 8 venivano trattati nel centro A, 4 venivano trattati nel centro B, 1 nel centro oncologico C e 0 in altri centri oncologici più distanti dall'area. A questo punto la popolazione del distretto di censimento veniva associata al centro oncologico che risultava il maggiore fornitore dei pazienti oncologici. In questo modo sono state costruite i bacini di utenza associando tutta la popolazione di un distretto se i pazienti trattati nel medesimo distretto afferivano maggiormente a un centro oncologico. A questo punto, in questo modo, sono state create dei bacini di utenza che prendevano la configurazione a macchie. Quindi, verosimilmente, il bacino di utenza di un centro oncologico si collocava in prossimità del centro oncologico e la probabilità che un distretto fosse associato a un centro oncologico diminuiva all'allontanarsi del distretto dal centro oncologico stesso. Ok. È stato chiaro? C'è qualche domanda? Ok.
Thank you very much, Pietro. The population that is allocated to each cancer centre is then summated to arrive at a total catchment population for each centre. Each of the census wards, small areas, can then be colour-coded by its dominant cancer centre and plotted on a map to demonstrate the extent of any cancer centre's main catchment area. The nomogramma was used to test if the catchment area methodology might mask locations with many patients going to different providers. This was important given the changes in radiotherapy services taking place at the time. The first nomogramma here shows the situation in the north of England. This is the northeast of England, which is Newcastle, Durham, the northwest, which stretches from Manchester and Liverpool up to Carlisle, and you've got Yorkshire and the Humber, which is Leeds, Sheffield, York and Hull. What you see is that there is a lot of self-sufficiency. They're all grouped together round about 95. Now, the second nomogramma shows the situation in the Midlands and the southwest. The East Midlands is places like Lincolnshire, Leicester. The West Midlands is Birmingham, Stoke. And the Southwest stretches from Cornwall up to Gloucester through Bristol. So when you look at this, first of all, there are more centres, and they serve slightly smaller areas. And travel between them is easier than in the north of England. Therefore, there is less self-sufficiency overall. So they're more away from the 100-100. This third nomogramma shows the situation in the rest of England, the south and the east. Clearly, where there is much self-sufficiency in the east of England, which is Norwich, Cambridge, that's got a lot of self-sufficiency. And the southeast, which are the triangles, similarly, bit more patient flow. But in London, it's a lot less. As you can see, most of the London area centres have a lot of patient flow, and there are these two out here. Now, the two London centres are clear outliers nationally across the whole country. But what it reflects is their size. Both of them are quite small, and also they have specialist roles. These are the cancer centres with the top people, the specialist equipment, the research, and so on. The final English slide has all of them together. So you can see that that's the national average, but there is a lot of self-sufficiency with the two out here as outliers. Okay. I now turn to the research that was done by Alberto and his colleagues with data that was published in 2015 showing radiotherapy patient flows for all Italian cancer centres. It shows much more patient mobility. What's it down here? Wow. And less self-sufficiency than in England. But if you combine the two slides together, it is easy to see that there are very different patterns in the two countries, with very different mean values. There's England and here's Italy for the two countries. The question is, why? Why is this the case? Therefore, Alberto and I worked with colleagues, including Pietro, to find out. Now, the results of our research were published in the British Journal of Healthcare Management in 2017. I will describe the main points and conclusions. Comparisons were made on a range of criteria. Commissioning arrangements. Do you want to say anything about that, Pietro? No? Just let me read them over. Cultural expectations, definitions of base areas, the data that was used, analyses that were undertaken, and the research results. Ok, so Pietro?
Solo per spiegare il discorso dei commissioners, perché la gestione della sanità in Inghilterra è diversa da quella che abbiamo qua in Italia. In Italia i commissioner, che sono chi finanzia le cure della popolazione, sono le regioni, quindi in Italia abbiamo 20 commissioner che sono esattamente le regioni. In Inghilterra il finanziamento delle cure viene gestito da autorità più piccole. Infatti, come non è indicato nella slide, forse nella slide dopo, in Inghilterra invece che avere 20 finanziatori delle cure, ce ne sono 211. E sono autorità locali più piccole, che sono quelle che si occupano del finanziamento delle cure. Per contro, i centri oncologici risultano in numero di 50 in Inghilterra, mentre in Italia sono 197. Quindi c'è proprio un ribaltamento dei dati a seconda dell'analisi del dato che si sta analizzando.
Okay. Right. Therefore, one of the key points is that the cancer centres in England serve larger areas and populations. The variations, well, apparently in Italy there are variations in the quality of service, of care, which encourage patients to travel to access better care. In England, there is greater consistency of treatment, and referral arrangements encourage patients to go to the local centre. The way that works is there is a system called choice, where you choose where you want to go. You see your doctor, your primary care doctor, and they say, you have this problem, I will refer you to hospital, and you are then provided with a list of those hospitals where the doctors, the commissioners, have contracts. So there's only maybe 3 or 4 hospitals to choose from. Only in extreme cases would you, if you had a very rare condition, would you expect to travel a long distance.
Chiara la situazione del commissioner, come si riflette sulla... Pratica, adesso capo 2 in realtà quello che ha detto il professor Gandy. I commissioner, cioè chi finanzia le cure, ha contratti con un numero limitato di ospedali, quindi se uno si reca dal medico di base per accedere alle cure oncologiche, il medico di base propone una lista di 3 o 4 ospedali, salvo per patologie particolarmente gravi che ammettono il ricorso a ospedali che si trovano in altre parti, altrimenti l'accesso ai servizi è limitato ai 3 o 4 ospedali con cui il commissioner ha dei contratti attivi, e quindi questo limita la mobilità. Okay.
Yeah. We haven't free choice of the care center. You don't have a free choice of health center. In Italy, if a patient coming from Sicily want to come in Bologna to care himself in Bologna, in San Corso, or Rizzoli, or Rimini, he or she can come and he must be treated successfully. Region Emilia-Romagna asked region Sicilia the payment. In England, this doesn't fit.
No.
No free of choice.
Not anything as free as in Italy. The system works by creating contracts which were created based on historical workloads, and if you're in emergency, you're in a road traffic accident, you're on your holidays at the other end of the country, then you will be treated. But for elective cases or specialist cases like cancer, you will find that there are a limited number of choices. You can ask to be referred elsewhere, but then that has to get approval.
Because we have our contract approach is limited to payment. Yes.
But historically in England, it was about creating contracts which provide the provider trusts, the hospitals, with certainty about the amount of money that they will get, so that you would negotiate, and I've been a contracts director, you would negotiate 1,000 orthopedic cases, 2,000 general medical cases, and this would all be for the year with Whiston Hospital, and you would then cost that up, and it comes to so many £1 million, and say it comes to £12 million, and then Whiston Hospital would get £1 million per month, and you would monitor the activity against the base workload to make sure that the projected workload was on course, not diverting from the contract by much. There were mechanisms introduced to see if you were going far too high or if you were going far too low, to adjust the payments. This is a system that's evolved over time, but the basic principle is as I've just described. Okay?
Maybe it's because the quality of healthcare, because its population is treated in almost every hospital in the same way, they don't have reason to go elsewhere to have treatment or not.
The experience...
Because as Professor Cavallini said, that Sicily patients want to go to Bologna because they know that in Bologna they are treated well. I think this is the reason.
Culturally, and I've been involved in projects in Britain, people want to be treated as locally as possible. There were people in Liverpool who had the opportunity of being treated quickly for orthopedics, and they had to travel 15 kilometres. No, that's too far. No, they didn't like that. It's a very different culture. Okay. Right. Just bear with me, sorry. Okay. You will appreciate that by their definition and their construction, the cancer centre catchment areas in England maximise self-sufficiency, because each of the areas are allocated to the centre because the majority of the patients go there. The analyses for England used catchment areas, but the analyses for Italy used statutory regions. The data for England was for all radiotherapy patients for 1 year. The data for Italy was for inpatients and day cases for 6 months. If Italian outpatient data had been available, there might be greater self-sufficiency shown. The Nomogramma approach was the same in both countries. The results showed greater patient flow and less self-sufficiency in Italy, where 19% of inpatients and day cases crossed more than one regional boundary to receive treatment. It was concluded that the Nomogramma approach was valid in both countries. It was also anticipated that the patterns in the two countries might be more similar if England used statutory regions or Italy created and used natural catchment areas for its radiotherapy centres. The research highlighted the need to always take into account the context of service delivery and patient culture when evaluating and analysing patient flows. This is particularly important when comparing services in two different countries. Right. I'm now going to focus on the inverted nomogramma. And we go back to 2001-2002, when I was a project manager for a major research project investigating how to quantify and measure the production of aseptic products in hospitals. Does everybody understand what I mean by aseptic products? Do you want to say anything, Pietro? Sterile products? Drugs?
Cos'è aseptic product? We need a doctor to explain that. This is the aid for treatment, I think.
It's if you want a pre-filled syringe or then each one is produced and they're produced in sterile conditions in the pharmacy. Okay. I was also, besides being the project manager, I was also the lead person for the statistical work. So what was required was to maximize the use of aseptic products made in pharmacies. This helps minimize errors and improves patient safety. Hospitals have found that many of the aseptic units that were operating well below capacity. Some of them were really, really underutilized. It was decided to invest millions of pounds to enhance some of the key units to increase capacity and productivity. All hospitals would benefit by collaborating with each other and trading the additional products between each other. But there was an important issue. There was no formal data that had ever been collected on aseptic products. So how would we know if the investment was a success? The research project determined how to count and weight different aseptic products. I mean, weight in a statistical sense, it takes maybe 1 minute to produce a pre-filled syringe. It might take 10 minutes to produce a different, more sophisticated product. But a key objective was for the hospitals to increase collaboration with each other. Now, collaboration is a concept that is easy to understand, but the question was how to measure it and demonstrate any changes statistically. This was not an easy answer. I then had what to me was a moment of inspiration. Increased collaboration could be seen as reduced self-sufficiency. And therefore, if aseptic products were being traded between different hospitals, this was very similar to patients travelling between different health authorities for treatment. And therefore, I decided to see if the nomogramma would work with the research data. The pharmacists that were working with me liked the resulting diagram and the patterns, but they did not like the definitions of the axes. They were very, very convoluted. I will not even attempt to translate them in Italian. Okay. One of the pharmacists then said that if self-sufficiency was set at 0,0 rather than 100, 100, 100, 100, then there would be very simple definitions for the axes. X would be the percentage of products that a hospital used that were imported from commercial or other hospitals, and Y would be the percentage of products produced locally within the hospital that were exported or sold to other hospitals. Everyone liked this, and so it was adopted. And we took increased collaboration as being demonstrated by the hospital points moving further away from the point 0,0. Trends were shown using arrows, as illustrated from Gabriela Messina's diagram. And in order to distinguish this version from the original nomogramma, I named it the inverted nomogramma di Gandy. Okay. This is the actual analysis of the research data for aseptic dispensing. The hospitals that are high on the y-axis had very large production units which sold the aseptic products to other hospitals. These hospitals along the y-axis, the x-axis, had small units and bought in products. So, I mean, some of these, 80%, 90%. So, a great deal were imported. And they had small units and bought in products, particularly those that were commonly used. Products bought from commercial sources were included. The overall initiative was a success, with products imported increasing from 21% to 33% in 2004, and products exported increasing from 12% to 27%. Public health seeks to reduce smoking. In the UK, in 2004, it was projected that the percentage of adults who smoke would reduce from 27% to 23%. But this 4% reduction is a net figure. At the extremes, 4% of adults who smoke give up, 4% of adults who smoke give up and nobody starts smoking. Or all current smokers give up and a new, completely different cohort of 23% start smoking. Of course, it is going to be somewhere in between. But
capito questa è la differenza per cosa misura il nomogramma rispetto alla misura netta del 4% di gestione sui fumatori, che può derivare da nessuno che inizia a fumare e il 4% che smette, ma potrebbe derivare anche da la differenza tra chi ha iniziato e chi ha smesso. E ovviamente le due misure portano a approcci diversi, anche a diverse politiche per affrontare il problema. Quindi la valutazione netta del risultato non è sempre appropriata, dipende quali sono gli obiettivi.
Okay. But with those two extreme scenarios, the implications for the different smoking cessation services of the different patterns is considerable. So it was decided in 2008 to research the amount of turnover that existed in the adult smoking population. because no one had hard data, the approach that was adopted was to use a three-stage Delphi technique, asking over 300 general practitioners in primary care for their informed projections. The inverted nomogramma shows the figures, which are the blue, what you call them, not triangles, for 1 year, for 5 years, those are the purple, and for 10 years, which are the yellow. And what you see is that the mean figure for them moves for 1 year, to 5 years, and to 10 years. Now, what was interesting was that each of these points represents the projection of an individual general practitioner. This proves that doctors very rarely can agree on anything. And the Delphi approach takes the mean projection from all of the different doctors in this exercise. So it was what was concluded that when you took all of the analyses was that there was much greater effort required in smoking cessation because of the impact of the new and the returning smokers. Of course, this was at a time before vaping, cigaretta electronica became popular. Okay. There are 6 conventions when you are using the nomogramma that you should apply. The first is you need to clearly state whether you're using the nomogramma or the inverted nomogramma. You should construct it so that indicators should be assigned to axes so that the area above the 45-degree diagonal always relates to organisations that show net importation. Whether you want to show the letters A and B in the areas of the diagram is optional. What they do is they make it easier to reference by saying it's in A or B area. Different symbols have been used by different authors. I for imports, E for exports, R for residents. But you can use whatever you like really, as long as you use it consistently and appropriately. What we've found from experience is that where symbols are tightly grouped, it is okay to truncate, to chop the axis, so that you get a greater spread visually on the diagram, so that you can see which are the outliers. And also, whether you quote the formulae on the axes is discretionary. Applications in other sectors. I've spent a bit of time over the last 10 years exploring how widely we can actually use the different nomogrammas. And the first one that I'd like to talk about is that Alberto's colleague Caterina Grieri from Urbino, with the juvenile prisoners in Italy, and going back 2005.
La delinquenza minorile studiata.
Yep. The axes are truncated, 86 degrees, so there is much self-sufficiency across Italy, with Sicily and Sardinia the most self-sufficient, again, because they're islands. Okay. Do you want to say anything about that, Alberto? Oh, okay. Right. Together with my friend and colleague from John Lloyd's University. We looked at student mobility in the UK. This is where a student is from and where they go and study, looking at regions. And it showed a great deal of mobility, except in Scotland. But this was not necessarily so surprising, because Scottish students could study at Scottish universities for free, whereas all the English and the Welsh had to pay for their studies, even in Scotland. So, but it was very interesting that the whole mix. You can see that this one's Eastern is down to 30% there and 50%. A great deal of movement. Okay. I've been very interested in the relationship between where members of Parliament, political representatives, were born and their constituencies. I am not going to talk about Brexit. But it can be seen that regions far away from London tend to mostly select it can be seen that the regions that are far away from London tend mostly to select local politicians. So what you have is Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and the northeast of England. If you look at London down here and the east of England, there is a lot of movement on that. Sometimes people refer to candidates being parachuted into safe seats and so on, fixing things. But I've been monitoring the situation over time, and there is a definite trend. I mean, this is 2010. I've done it for 2015 and 2017, and there is a definite trend that the new and younger members of Parliament are more likely to be born in their region of birth. And it's important often because I think internationally people like to see that their local representatives are local. Okay? Sorry. This here, I've been looking at football. Do people like football? Okay. What I would say is that if anybody is interested in doing something about where members of Parliament, politicians are, and their regions, then I'd be very happy to work with them on that if anybody's interested. My final nomogramma is some current research that I'm involved in around football. I've used it to investigate the movement of football players across the European leagues. England has the lowest of, this is 2015 data, has the lowest percentage of players in its Premier League from the home country. Of the 5 main leagues, Italy has the highest percentage of players from the country that play in the home league. Okay. So, I'm now going to talk about where the inverted nomogramma has been used in other sectors. This one is international trade. I used this in the paper 10 years ago, and what it shows is the volume of international trade, and what is seen is that Europe is the most self-sufficient world region in respect of international trade. Interestingly, it is also seen that the Middle East and Africa are both approximately 90% of its trade is exported, and 90% of its trade is imported. I infer that this is to do that most of the exports are things like oil and raw materials, and most of the imports will be manufactured goods. Next, I show you migration across the European Union in 2011. The axes are truncated to 4.5%, and it is seen that both Italy, where is Italy? This is Italy down here, and the United Kingdom, which is here, have immigration exceeding emigration. But there are some very interesting outliers. For net emigration down here, we have Ireland, Latvia, and Lithuania. And up here, we have Cyprus and, amazingly, Luxembourg. So, the next slide here shows exactly the same data, but what I've tried to do, and this is a bit of an experiment, was the size of the diagrams, exactly the same symbols, but I've made them proportionate to the size of each country. So here we have Italy, and you can see it's one of the bigger countries, and the UK. So they stand out quite clearly. But the other outliers, Ireland, Lithuania, Latvia, they're quite small. And you can see that Luxembourg is very small, as is Cyprus. And that's one of the issues when you're using the nomogramma, the point that I made earlier about actually considering the size of the thing. So the value of this approach is that politicians and planners will always talk about net migration and the impact on a country of net migration of say 300,000 is different for 300,000 immigrants and 0 immigrants compared to 1.3 million immigrants and 1 million immigrants. Finally, I'm going to show 2 slides which demonstrate staff turnover in an anonymous large UK university. I won't mention its name, but I have connections. What we found, this first slide shows the patterns of staff turnover for different staff categories. And as you can see, there is great variation with outliers. So we've truncated to 50%, but here, according to the type of contract, there is a great deal of variation. And this outlier here was to do with people with fixed-term contracts. Females, all age group, different age groups, and males for different age groups. So there's a great deal of variation that is not necessarily obvious if you were to just say, what is the staff turnover figure for the whole university? Which is right down here. Okay. The second one shows the situation for different faculties and different departments. Again, wide variation according to science got a lot of the outliers. And a lot of these issues are interlinked because a lot of the science departments have a lot of projects that are funded, research projects with limited funding and time, so it's a 3-year project, and so they take on staff and they take them on a fixed term contract, and therefore at the end of that contract, after they finish the project, then they let the staff go. This brings issues for managing your staff, and as I said, if you would just look at the total figure, then you would completely miss what is very important. What the analyses allow managers to do is to target staff and departments that might have problems. There might be high turnover, and because there is low staff morale or they're not doing things well, but it means that they can raise issues for improved recruitment and retention of staff. The approach is valid for any large organisation, such as a university or a hospital in the public sector, or a large commercial organisation, and I'm aware of multinational issues, also issues for certain multinationals. Okay, limitations. There are things to do, there are limitations in using the nomogramma, in that, as I said, it doesn't reflect the size of organisations, because percentages mask size, and I tried to show you with the countries with the population flows. But you can actually use proportional size if you think that this will be helpful. Therefore, it is always desirable to place the table that you have got the actual data on and the percentage alongside the nomogramma. But there are a lot of advantages to using the nomogramma. It is an exploratory data analysis and benchmarking tool which is used to inform decision-making processes. It is best used in the early stages of an investigation because it can point to where more detailed, localized analysis may be required. Therefore, it supports an action learning approach, and it highlights the dangers of concentrating on net figures. As mentioned earlier, it can also show trends over time. One particular advantage is that it only requires simple data, and it is easily understandable. Internationally, there is an increasing emphasis on diagrammatical techniques, and the nomogramma makes possible a visual scan across many data points, subjects, and their relative juxtapositions in one presentation. This enables many common thinking errors to be minimized, if not completely avoided. The nomogramma enables the exploration of problematical issues, prompting the why, what, and wherefore. Current research that I'm involved in, I continue to look for new areas to apply it. One is to do with cancer cohorts, where I will be trying to combine prevalence and incidence data to investigate turnover in the numbers of cancer patients. Also, I have data on university applications and admissions, and we'll look to see if there are any patterns to different faculties and courses, and to see what this might mean for university management. And I also need to write up the research that I've done on the football. And that's it. Thank you. Questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Quello che mi permetto di dire è questo, no? Noi, almeno nelle nostre piccole ricerche, abbiamo visto un'ampia utilizzazione e una grandissima utilità del modello di Gandy per lo studio di quella che viene chiamata la mobilità sanitaria, ma una visione così olistica di tutte le applicazioni che può avere in cui svariati campi il modello di Gandy era una cosa che a me era in parte sconosciuta, salvo una tesi sperimentale della nostra sinistra di ricerca che aveva studiato e che aveva presentato qui in occasione del master di criminologia, no, il problema della delinquenza minorile. Io credo che una lezione come questa sia da ricordare non solo per i nostri studenti, ma soprattutto per le autorità sanitarie che sono qui presenti, perché possono trovare uno spunto di riflessione e nel contempo spunti di commento per valutare la loro posizione su un fenomeno che riveste una grande complessità e che rappresenta spesso il cruccio dei direttori generali che tendono spesso a valutare come punto negativo della propria attività la mobilità passiva e non esaltare praticamente completamente quella che appunto viene definita la mobilità attiva. Credo che il professor Gandy meriti prima di tutto un ringraziamento e nel contempo un applauso per aver fatto una lezione così brillante e così operativa, per dare anche un'immagine stessa all'Università degli Studi di San Marino e al corso di laurea in Ingegneria Gestionale, dove io e il professor Renzi abbiamo il compito di preparare giovani in questo delicato ed importante settore. Ricordando una frase famosa di Winston Churchill, che dice appunto che una popolazione in salute è la migliore risorsa che un paese possa avere.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how Winston Churchill came in there, but
I have a question on the Nomogramma of the
politicians, yeah, yeah.
Because if I understand, this is the regional election, for the regional election or local election, or for the parliament, the national parliament?
These figures are for the national parliament. Each of the constituencies,
yes,
yeah,
the local,
they are allocated to the statutory regions that there are. So it's the MPs that are for like the northwest of England, all their constituencies, and where the MPs were from, and so on across the whole.
And every region has a number of
yes, yes. Each there's 650 MPs, 650. Far too many.
Yeah.
Well, no, it is accepted because the Electoral Commission, which is independent of Parliament, has recommended that the number of MPs should reduce to, I think it's 600.
600.
Yeah. Those proposals have been in place for some time, but surprisingly, the MPs haven't voted to reduce the number of MPs. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas, as it were.
And the reason why the MPs try to be elected in different regions?
If you look at the ages of the MPs, I mean, some of them go back, were born in the 1930s, and people move around.
Okay.
We went by where people were born because, from a data perspective, that is fixed.
Yeah.
If you there are people who were moved from where they were born at a very young age and were brought up in another part of the country because their father, say, went and got a job somewhere else.
Yeah.
So they're local. But what I decided was totally inappropriate would be to try and do a life history of each and every member of Parliament. It was hard enough trying to find where some of them were born. So it's a high level just to see what pattern there is. It doesn't prove anything, but it gives interesting pointers. And I know that, for example, if you're I think the feeling is that if you want to be elected in Scotland and you're not Scottish, then you're very likely to not get elected. As an example.
Parlavamo ieri sera con il professor Gandy, ai termini militari avviene così.
Oh, okay.
Because,
Sorry.
Io poi adesso non sono particolarmente ferrato in materia, ma in Italia succede spesso che i parlamentari vanno a farsi eleggere in paesi perché hanno più probabilità. I said what I say before, that in Italy there is phenomenon that some politicians went to other regions to be elected, in which they have more probabilities to be elected. So politicians.
You have the data to prove it.
No.
That's part of the fun of it, you know, about collecting data
quite
to see if there are
interesting. I
factors.
don't know if it's the same phenomenon with there with.
Might be.
But in Italia can be a good research, I think.
Yeah.
Ci sono altri interventi? Anche da parte dei ragazzi, pensate. Questo dibattito, con questa, diciamo così, valutazione olistica dell'applicabilità del modello in vari settori, ovviamente chiudiamo la serata e ovviamente con i ragazzi ci rivedremo domani mattina e approfondiremo le vostre applicazioni fatte sulle schede di dimissione ospedaliera appena prodotte dall'Ufficio Centrale della Programmazione Sanitaria. Di sera io ne ho potuta già correggere una, va perfettamente, per cui discuteremo domani su questi elaborati e andremo avanti col programma nostro. Grazie per la vostra presenza e di nuovo arrivederci.
Thank you very much. Can I just repeat what I said badly in Italian? That it is a great honour to be invited to speak to you today, and I'd like to express my thanks to Alberto and Pietro and to the University.
Le applicazioni di questo modello. Avrete tutto. Grazie per
Very good. You're happy with that? You're happy with that? I'm always paranoid about.
Posso salutare? Arrivederci. Molto bravo.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.